Hello. In this video, I'm going to read to you an excerpt from the wonderful book Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, written by Randolph Nesse, MD. It's a fantastic book that describes some underlying evolutionary causes or models of understanding when it comes to non-pathological negative feelings and mental disorders, so pathological situations. And I've been greatly enjoying this book. I am almost finished with it. And I decided to pick a chapter and read it to you. So perhaps you're going to enjoy it as well. This one is about generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. Generalized anxiety disorder is about as far as you can get from PTSD and still have an anxiety disorder. Instead of symptoms tightly connected to a very specific event or danger, GAD consists of diverse worries and physical symptoms of anxiety. Worry doesn't sound too serious until you actually talk with people who suffer from GAD. To estimate its severity, I ask, what % of your mental life is devoted to worry? For many patients, the response is more than 90%. That's all I think about. A typical patient with GAD worries about money, storms, health, children, and the security of employment and marriage. Things that most people would brush off become festering preoccupations. I am only 62. What happens if my company goes broke and I lose my insurance and I get sick before I'm eligible for Medicare? What if my daughter plays in the backyard and a deer jumps the fence and she gets a tick bite and gets Lyme disease and I don't notice the rash? Their mental lives are a continual stream of what if potential catastrophes. They also experience physical symptoms, especially muscle tension, fatigue, trembling, sweating, and bowel symptoms. Such symptoms themselves are a fine focus for worry. The danger monitoring system is set to a hair trigger in people with GAD. Their minds fill with dire fantasies. Pride and pleasure as a daughter sets off for prom night are displaced by visions of accidents or pregnancy. Instead of time to relax in those few extra minutes when a spouse arrives home late, there's only worry about accidents or heart attacks. A fascinating recent finding is that genetic tendencies to GAD overlap strongly with those for depression. The specific responsible alleles have not been found, but relatives of people with GAD have an increased risk of both GAD and depression, and relatives of people with depression have an increased risk of depression and GAD. Both disorders reflect a state of caution in the face of adversity. Both may escalate because of vicious cycles instigated by evolved systems that make the systems more responsive after bad things happen. Many other psychiatric problems can also be viewed as excessive protective responses. Eating disorders arise from a desperate fear of obesity. Pathological jealousy arises from a fear that a partner will leave or be unfaithful. Paranoia arises from fears that others are plotting against you. Spending the right amount of energy on protection is wise, but many of us spend far too much, the smoke detector principle notwithstanding. The smoke detector principle is described in a previous chapter, and it is about the price of not noticing when something's wrong. So evolutionarily, we're wired to respond to signals that something might be wrong because the stakes are too high. From the perspective of survival, it makes more sense to respond, even if it's just a false alarm, than to be relaxed and not respond, because that could cost us our lives, at least from an evolutionary perspective. Obviously, in our modern society, we don't have to be so alert anymore, but nevertheless, in our biological makeup, in our genes, and in the evolutionary sense, these reflexes, they still exist. All right, on to the next chapter, titled, What Should We Do Differently? Understanding the evolutionary origins and functions of anxiety does not suggest a special evolutionary kind of treatment, but it nonetheless transforms treatment. In my early years of practice, I sympathized with my anxiety patients for having a disease. No matter how carefully I phrased it, that made many feel weak and flawed. When I instead began emphasizing that anxiety is a useful response that often goes overboard, many patients reported feeling normalized and empowered. Women are twice as likely as men to have an anxiety disorder. Many explanations have been proposed based on hormones, brain mechanisms, and social forces, all of which suggest that there is something wrong with women. An evolutionary perspective flips the analysis on its head. Women, on average, have about the right amount of anxiety for their own welfare. Men have the right amount to maximize transmission of their genes at a huge risk to their health. Arguments about whether panic disorder, GAD, and social anxiety disorder are fundamentally the same or different are unnecessary. All are anxiety subtypes, each partially differentiated from ancestor precursor states to cope with dangers in different kinds of situations. Instead of seeking special explanations for why some people have more than one anxiety disorder, the association of multiple kinds of anxiety types makes sense in light of their common evolutionary origins. Instead of assuming that anxiety is always excessive, an evolutionary view calls attention to the smoke detector principle and the need for research on hypophobia. An evolutionary view also encourages setting aside abstract debates about whether anxiety disorders are mostly physical or mostly psychological, and turning attention instead to a personalized assessment of all possible causes of an individual's anxiety. Some patients have lifelong problems similar to those of their relatives. Others have no family history and no problems with anxiety until some life event sets off a disorder. An evolutionary perspective also helps clinicians and patients to put aside the misguided notion that treatment choices should be guided by beliefs about causes. Problems that arise mainly from genetic or psychological causes often respond well to psychological treatments. Problems induced by life situations often benefit from medications. An evolutionary perspective also illuminates how treatments work. Anti-anxiety drugs do not correct a neurotransmitter deficit. They disrupt the anxiety system, just as aspirin disrupts fever and pain systems. Behavior therapy also changes the brain. It acts via mechanisms that evolved to adjust anxiety responses as environments become less or more dangerous. These mechanisms do not just reverse conditioning. Instead, exposure therapy creates new inhibitory impulses from the frontal lobes that descend and prevent anxiety signals from getting to consciousness. This is why stress can revive old, unrelated fears. Pavlov conditioned dogs to fear a sound and then conditioned them to eliminate the fear. But after a flood nearly drowned the dogs in their cages, many showed a return of their fear. Positive feedback spirals escalate anxiety. Repeated exposure to danger indicates that the anxiety system is not providing sufficient protection, so the system adjusts to become more sensitive. This poses the risk of positive feedback. Daniel Nettle and Melissa Bateson, biologists at the University of Newcastle, have proposed a special version of the smoke detector principle that describes this capacity for adjusting responses. As noted already, such self-adjusting systems are vulnerable to dysregulation. Monitoring for symptoms of panic makes it more likely that minor psychological changes will escalate to a full-blown panic attack. Fearless individuals are often admired, but their challenges are small compared to the greater resolve many anxiety patients demonstrate by giving a talk, going to the dentist, flying on a plane, leaving the house, or coming for anxiety treatment. Treatment can reduce their suffering, and evolutionarily informed treatment can do that faster. In the meanwhile, people with anxiety disorders deserve recognition for their courage and daily determination to live full lives despite their symptoms. This chapter is called Why Mood Regulation Systems Are Fragile. Mood regulation systems are vulnerable to failure for the same evolutionary reasons as other bodily systems. Sometimes the failure is only apparent. Sometimes it is because of living in a modern environment. Sometimes it reflects trade-offs or the limits of what natural selection can do. Each deserves consideration. The smoke detector principle explains some normal but nonetheless excessive mood responses. Low mood conserves calories and avoids risks. High mood is expensive and can be dangerous. When outcomes are hard to predict, erring on the side of low mood may provide advantages, especially in harsh environments. Recognizing that misery may be useless, even when it is normal, is a foundation for making wise treatment decisions. Some mood changes benefit our genes at our expense. Our desires for the perfect partner and great sex provide great pleasure when they can be satisfied. But for many people, they cause chronic, grinding frustration. Desperate striving for high status and wealth gives big payoffs for few, but wrecks the life of many. I treated, or tried to treat, many depressed VIPs, mostly corporate vice presidents and deans. The core problem for many was overweening ambition that left them perpetually unsatisfied despite their substantial accomplishments. Recognizing that such desires can't be satisfied could relieve immense suffering. However, our ancestors, who found it easy to ignore such desires, had fewer children, so we have brains that push us to strive in ways that benefit our genes. Plato warned that pursuing pleasure leads to unhappiness. The Buddha taught that desires can never be satisfied. Every religion provides advice about how to get off the hedonic treadmill, leaving its emotional baggage behind. However, Such advice is like advice about diets. Correct, well-meaning, plentiful, and, for good evolutionary reasons, well-nigh impossible to actually follow. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you will read this book. Thank you for watching and listening. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.